This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. When my father got home from his service with the Marine Corps, he proceeded to pack me and my mama up. I guess I was probably 7, I think, and moved us to Georgia from Louisiana. Louisiana is all I'd ever known growing up. And you know, when I arrived in Georgia, I had just turned 8. And the first school that I was ever in, obviously an elementary school, but the first grade I was ever in there was 3rd grade. And I'll never forget my teacher, because I was a fish out of water. I didn't know anybody. I remember being very scared. But the teacher I had, her name was Miss Peoples. She was always kind to me. I remember, Dave, she had a big old beehive hairdo. And she always took time, and she was kind to me. It's almost like she understood just for a moment of how fearful I was, because all these other kids had been together since they were probably in kindergarten. But she made a lasting impression on me. And it's something that has stuck with me to this very day. And because of the kindness that she extended to me, I used her kind of as a role model in my teaching. It's weird how, you reflect back on your life and you think about those little benchmarks. To try to be kind to my students within reason, without knuckling under to their demands so much. But Miss Peoples had an effect on me, and I'll forever be grateful for that experience I had with her. But today, we're going to discuss another 3rd grade teacher, a lady who was single. She had a job teaching in public schools, but she was also pregnant. And it was probably for that reason that she was executed by a stranger off the street. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, you started elementary school out in California, didn't you?
I did.
You did? You remember
sure did.
3rd grade? You remember when you were 8?
I do remember it, Joe, pretty much as you do. 3rd grade's an important year in our lives. You learn so many new things, and the teacher has to be like super patient with everybody. I think that's why we have such fond memories of our teacher in those years of 3rd, 4th grade. But anyway, the reason this has hit you and I is because we have the death of a 30-year-old 3rd grade teacher. Her name is Jocelyn Peters, and she is well liked by friends and family. She has no known enemies. And to top it off, she is now 7 months pregnant. Her body is discovered by her boyfriend, the father of her unborn baby, Cornelius Green. Green is married to another woman, but he is currently living with his sister. Green returned from a short trip to Chicago by catching a 6:40 a.m. Amtrak train from Chicago to St. Louis earlier in the day. He arrives at Jocelyn Peters' apartment a little after 3 p.m. and finds her in her bed, unconscious, with a gunshot wound to the head. At 3:15, Cornelius Green calls 911. Jocelyn Peters is pronounced dead at the scene. So the murder of this 3rd grade teacher begins in her apartment with her boyfriend, Cornelius Green. But Joe, you were talking to me about 3rd grade, just generally speaking about 3rd grade and the impact the death of their teacher would have on the students because of your 3rd grade memories.
You know, one of the things I remember about 3rd grade, Dave, I remember that is the year that I first began to learn cursive. It's a critical moment in a student's life, and it's either going to it's at that age, it's either going to succeed or fail based upon the type of teacher you have and their level of commitment, because it's intense learning. It really is. And I can only imagine the void that was left behind in not just this victim's family, but also her colleagues at school, and certainly these kids. I just told you, I'm not going to tell you precisely how many years ago it was.
Right.
It was we've had several presidents since then. I'll put it that way. It was a long time ago, and I still remember her beehive hairdo. I still remember her name. I remember the classroom, and I remember her kindness. And that's how impactful these teachers can be on somebody's life. And isn't it amazing, Dave, how I've often thought about this when you have a homicide involving somebody that is so connected to an environment like a school, or maybe they're involved in civic things. It's almost as if you've got this beautiful, pristine, calm mountain lake, and it's not moving at all. And suddenly somebody picks up a boulder and drops it right in the middle, and those ripples just go out forever and ever and ever, and it touches everything. And you're only seeing what it's touching on the surface. You never know what it's impacting beneath the surface, Dave.
In this particular case, Jocelyn Peters is a third grade teacher. She's 30 years old, and she's 7 months pregnant, Joe. She, Miss Peters, has been having a relationship with the school principal. His name is Cornelius Green. Now, Cornelius Green is a bit of a player. He has a wife that he's legally married to. He has Jocelyn Peters carrying his child, and he has other girlfriends as well. When Ms. Peters will not end the pregnancy, Cornelius Green decides her being pregnant, having this baby, is going to cost me my career, my marriage. It's going to ruin me. So I'm going to take her out. He gets his friend, Phillip Cutler. Phillip Cutler he's an Okie from Muskogee. He lives in Oklahoma. This takes place in St. Louis, Missouri. And Cornelius Green and Phillip Cutler have been lifelong friends. And Cornelius Green reaches out to his buddy Phillip Cutler in Oklahoma and says, I need help. Now, we're putting a number of these things together, but the bottom line, Cornelius Green steals $2,500 from the school that he is principal of, and UPS is the money to Phillip Cutler.
This is a middle school. These schools have these, I don't know, we used to call them kitties. They're like a kitty where you keep the cash, right? And it's maybe, I don't know, maybe it's cash that's taken in from the school fair. Right. Maybe it's cash that's taken in from some kind of fundraiser, like selling candy or peanuts or something like that. And after a while, some of these accounts get kind of robust, and it's all cash. That's the thing about it. It's all cash. And as you well know, cash is very difficult to trace. But in this case, you're going to take it from your place of employment. And I think the idea that you're going to, was it UPS? Is that what the story was?
Here's where it
that
starts.
You're going to UPS it to this individual?
Well, in our world we live in, you and I have talked about the number of surveillance cameras that are available, the way we use cell phone. We ping a cell phone for a location on somebody. In this case, investigators fill in the blanks using text messages. There's a text message from Green to Cutler. They don't talk specifics, just they know what they're talking about. And it is when that timing is arranged for Cutler to come to town. And Cutler sends message to Green about a package. You need to send a misspelled package, but got to send me the package. So the principal of the school steals $2,500 from the school and then uses the school's address as the return address on the parcel that he sends. He sends $2,500 to Cutler in Oklahoma and uses the school as the return address, Joe.
Yeah, I never can. This is my thing, and I'm certainly no genius. That's for sure. It's been proven over and over throughout my life. But one of the things about these kind of conspiratorial cases, where you've got this a couple of people that enter into a conspiracy together to commit a crime. I'm always amazed at the level of, I don't know if it's ignorance or arrogance, that
Hmm.
they think that they're going to get away with it.
Right.
Or maybe they're just so out of their minds, not in touch with reality. They don't really calculate the cost of what they're doing, and they think that they're going to survive this because intact.
Again, remember, this is a man who is married, legally married to somebody else. He's having an affair with a teacher. She is now pregnant, and he's got other relationships with other women. This is something else that came out in this investigation. And all I'm thinking, Joe, is his best plan was to give his buddy $2,500 to come and kill her, to kill the woman carrying his child to protect himself. Now, what kind of a sociopath are you that can have this type of relationship stuff going on? Think about it. He doesn't care about his marriage. He's legally married. He stood up in front of God and everyone and married a woman, and then cheated on her to the point where, by the way, Green is not living at the time all this takes place. He's living in a house with his sister. So his legally married wife has had her fill of him, apparently. But that's where it all comes about. So Green steals money from the school, UPSs it to his buddy Cutler in Oklahoma, and they arrange for Mr. Cutler to arrive in St. Louis, Missouri, and to stay at Green's house with Green and his sister. So Cutler comes to town. Green then takes an Amtrak train out of town to Chicago. He goes from St. Louis to Chicago, and he stays up there for a couple of days. Now, he leaves Cutler keys to his Kia Optima, and by the way, keys to the apartment of Jocelyn Peters. So while Green is away in Chicago, that's his alibi. He's away in Chicago. His buddy comes from Oklahoma, stays in his house, uses his car, uses his keys to enter the woman's apartment. And in the middle of the night, while Jocelyn Peters is sound asleep, her 7-month pregnant, she's 7 months pregnant,
7
Joe.
months, yeah.
That baby's moving around. She's feeling the baby kick and elbows and
absolutely.
This guy Cutler, Phillip Cutler, at 35 years old, goes along with his buddy Cornelius Green to take the life of this woman by putting a .38 caliber firearm up to her head and using a potato as a silencer.
Yeah, it's the audacity of it. I think that you actually think that you can get away with this sort of thing. And here's another thing. I'm curious. She's 7 months along, and you and I both have experienced being in the presence of our beautiful wives over the years, that when they're pregnant, what that circumstance is like. It's a very uncomfortable time. Does anybody else in her life have an awareness of this pregnancy? And in a school, which is kind of like its own closed community, people talk. People love to talk. And can you imagine if word had gotten out about this and the connection, the connective tissue, as they're so fond of saying today, between her, the victim here, who, by the way, the unborn child is a victim as well, and this principal. You think word may have gotten out? You think she had said anything to anybody? Because this I do know. You cannot defeat science, and you cannot defeat our investigative abilities. If we have an unknown and we have someone that is tied up in a relationship like this with somebody, and we can figure that out, you will be found. In a case like this, you're not just looking for the shooter. Initially, you are, because, when you enter onto a scene, and I can only imagine these investigators, when they got to her apartment and they see her there, dead and pregnant, and she's got a single gunshot wound to the head, I can almost predict the way the questions came about in the investigator's mind. First off, they're going to say, was she married? Was she divorced? Was she dating anybody? And that's how it's going to go. Because, look, say what you will about criminals. Criminals don't go around most of the time just out and out executing, and this was an execution, Dave, executing a pregnant woman like this in her own home. And that gives you another clue here. Who had, what's the old adage, opportunity accessibility, in this particular case, who
means motive opportunity.
Yeah. Who's going to have that ability to get this close to her in order to pull this off? And so when you're kind of attempting to connect all the investigative threads here, I wouldn't think that it would take very long to run a lot of this down.
I actually, when we first started looking at this, went back to the reporting at the time. The reason we're looking back at this happened in March of 2016, and it took years before it made its way through the court system. But I went and looked at what happened in the investigation, because you have this person, an elementary school teacher, third grade teacher, pregnant, is murdered in her apartment. That's headline news. That's going to be your cover story in the St. Louis paper. And so I started tracking it from there. And what they knew very quickly, just to give you a heads up, I told you that Cornelius Green actually booked an Amtrak train trip to Chicago, leaving his buddy Phillip Cutler at the house with his keys and his car. And it was Cornelius Green who is in Chicago when Phillip Cutler allegedly shoots and kills Miss Peters. He calls and tells Cornelius Green, she's dead, come on home. And so Green gets an Amtrak train ticket at 6:30 in the morning, comes back to St. Louis, and goes straight to her apartment where Cornelius Green, discovers her body. So he has his train ticket leaving town and returning so that he can show I wasn't even in town when this happened. And he's the one, Cornelius Green, is the one that calls 911. I just got back from Chicago. I came to my girlfriend's house, and she's laying here dead in bed. And that's where the investigation began. So you said, well, is she married? Does she have a boyfriend? Divorced? What is the situation? And boom, he's right here. The boyfriend, baby daddy, the married man is standing right in front of you. And it didn't take any kind of time for them to put this together, Joe. We're talking, you know what? Phillip Cutler was arrested within 90 days in Oklahoma.
Yeah, and it makes sense because, look, somebody's going to sing on this one of two ways. You're going to get information. And this principle is supposedly to, attain that level of success where someone has put you in charge of an entire school of children. You would think that you're going to be pretty bright, that you'll be educated, well-educated. However, in this particular case, when you start talking about, and I use the term electronic breadcrumbs a lot, why are you going to be having these conversations, with this individual that has arrived from Oklahoma at your bidding, by the way, and you're leaving not just electronic breadcrumbs behind, but also when you begin to think about, well, hey, dude, how'd you get your hands on $2,500 cash? Because my next question would be, does this guy naturally have this much liquidity where he's traveling around with this bundle of cash? Well, his buddies ask him to come into town. Does his buddy have this kind of liquidity where he can get his hands on $2,500 cash? Oh, where does he work? Well, he works at school. Gee, school secretary, can you tell us how much money is in the kitty or how much is missing from the kitty? Oh my gosh, yeah, we got $2,500 missing. So it doesn't take an Einstein here to begin to kind of put this together and understand. I think one of the curious things about this is, as you had mentioned, Dave, it took so long to kind of get the wheels up on this and running. And I think that what you're dealing with here are two separate entities that are pursuing a prosecution here. At a federal level, you don't have a traditional homicide charge. That's a state charge.
What's a federal charge then?
Most of the time there is no federal charge for homicide. You can have things like conspiracy. You can have things like fraud. There is no federal statute on homicide.
Just to give you a quick heads up at how quickly they figured this out, Joe, I went back and looked at my research on this. June 10th, 2016. All right, now this happened March 24th, 2016. Less than 90 days, they already knew the paper out of Muskogee, the Phoenix, and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch all had Phillip J. Cutler arrested, charged with first-degree murder of his best friend's pregnant girlfriend. They already had all of the pieces and parts in this case when they charged Cutler less than 90 days after the murder. They already knew that he had gone to St. Louis, that he had driven his buddy's car, that he stayed at his buddy's house. They knew all of that, and that he got keys because there was no sign of forced entry.
Forced entry or struggle. Yeah, the door hasn't been kicked in. It hasn't been pried open. No windows are busted.
And what about a potato as a silencer, Joe? Have you ever heard this before?
Yeah, it's one of those kind of urban myths that has been floated for years and years, relative to trying to suppress, because first off, there's no such thing as an actual silencer. That's a misnomer. It's something that Hollywood created. And people will say, well, gee, I want to silence this weapon. Wrong answer. You're not going to silence the weapon.
So when I hear them, they pull the trigger, goes, pew, pew, it's just that really light air sound. That's not a real thing.
It's a lot louder than that. Now the only time that you will get an appreciable reduction in the noise is if you're using something kind of diminished, like a small caliber arm, like a 25 caliber round, where you can kind of retard the sound to that point. As a matter of fact, famously, and I actually got to handle one of these weapons one time. There were either 7 or 8 of these handguns that were made by the CIA. Had a guy from the U.S. Army Crime Lab that came to my school at my invitation and spoke. He brought with him one of the 6 or 7, I can't remember the exact number, of 22 caliber pistols that was used in the Phoenix Project. And I got to handle this thing. And it was used in Vietnam so that they could conduct, how can I gently put this, or that they could eradicate other people. Okay, I'll put it to you that way. Of course, I didn't have the opportunity to fire it or anything, but this thing had a built-in suppressor to it, and you could accomplish a significant reduction in sound. But when you're trying to defeat literally the sound barrier, first off, you're going to have something that is subsonic. The round itself is going to have to be subsonic. That means that you can hear the explosion of the round going off traditionally. All right, that's something that you're going to hear. But what you're really hearing, if you've got something that's hypersonic, you're hearing the cracking of the sound barrier at that point in time. And so you got a lot going on there. And how can you actually facilitate that to the point where you're going to reduce the sound? To that point, there are people out there that have made so-called homemade suppressors. Famously, a case I've been covering for years now, the Piketon massacre. They actually manufactured, that family actually manufactured homemade suppressors, and they can be made out of any number of different types of materials.
In Godfather 2, De Niro used a towel wrapped around the end of the rifle.
Yeah, to kind of muffle the sound, but you're never going to complete. Yeah, it did. It did catch fire at that moment in time, and that's
all right. So the potato won't work. Okay.
No, it won't. It doesn't have the density. And now it would seem, that a potato would be dense enough to knock the sound down. You're not going to accomplish that task, and it's kind of been. I've read reports about this case. They've mentioned a 38 caliber revolver. I saw one publication. I saw another one where they had referred to a 380 auto. Well, a 380 auto, the diameter of the round, that's a caliber, the diameter of the round is the same as a 38 special, but it's not as robust of a round. 380 auto, first off, it's a semi-automatic. It's a very small frame. And in order to get a potato, and I can't believe I'm actually saying this, but in order to get a potato on the end of the muzzle, you would almost have to fit the potato onto the end of the barrel and tape it somehow. But the problem that you have to defeat with that is that if it's a semi-automatic handgun, the slide is going to go back and forth. So that really diminishes it and really does knock down whatever you're trying to achieve. Now, with a revolver, which is a wheel gun that goes around, kind of like an old cowboy pistol, what you're going to do, it would be much easier because some of these are 6-inch. This is what cops used to carry years ago. They would carry 6-inch Smith & Wesson 38 special revolvers. And I could see someone potentially carving out a potato and placing that over the end of the iron sight. Because if you're talking about executing somebody in close proximity, remember, this poor woman was laying in bed, Dave, 7 months pregnant. The idea is to get close enough to her so that you can be within just mere inches of the back of her head. And then all of a sudden, you unleash hell. The problem with a conspiracy is that it takes more than one. And in this particular case, I think that we have a perfect storm as far as the police are concerned, from an investigative perspective. How do you put all of these pieces together? How is it that you can go in and assess this and not think that it was someone that was intimately connected to this third grade teacher that did this? Going back to the potato, I can, first off, I'd mentioned just a moment ago that the questions that the cops would initially have. Part of me also wants to know, did they look around and there were particulate bits of, well, you don't know what it is, because many times you'll have stuff that's commingled with blood, Dave, and brain. And you're looking around and you're thinking, what is this?
You mentioned 380 versus a 38. And just so you know, I saw the 38 caliber was mentioned in some of our newspaper articles, but the U.S. Justice.gov website said it was a 380. What kind of entrance and exit wound are we talking about? She's shot in the head. She's 7 months pregnant. I'm expecting that there's going to be more blood because of carrying a baby. I don't know why I'm thinking like that, but what is this going to do? The 380 in the head, what kind of damage? And I don't mean to be gross, but it's body bags. I just want to know,
body bags,
what is it going to look like? Is it going to be everywhere? Is it going to have blowback going back towards the ceiling?
Could. It all depends on the proximity of the end of that muzzle, which again, and this is to your point, is very important here, because that potato, I still can't believe I'm saying this, but that potato is what is referred to as an intermediate target. So let's just say, for instance, we're standing in a building and we're behind a cinder block wall, okay, and somebody's firing a high velocity round, so like a .223 caliber, 5.56 millimeter. It can penetrate the cinder blocks and come through, but several things change. The structure of the bullet, the physical structure of the bullet changes because it's passed through an intermediate target. Now, obviously, a potato and a cinder block wall are not the same type of surfaces, but surfaces they are. And it's going to affect, first off, bullet trajectory, the flight, the external ballistics of the round as it passes through this body, this potato. And my guess is, Dave, is that when they began to examine her body at autopsy, they would have, one of the things that we have to do is shave. If there's an entrance in the head, we literally shave that area where the hair is all the way around it. We save that hair too. And one of the reasons we do is that we're looking for gunshot powder in the hair. So we'll save a bit of that hair as well. And what you're looking at, so that you can fully visualize it, is the shape of the entrance wound. Is it a circular defect, which you see many times with gunshot wounds to the head? The head's a tricky bit because of the bone structure underlying the scalp. So you can have these kind of malformed things that occur just with the skull itself, but how much more so when it's passing through the body of a potato. The trajectory is going to change, the pitch and the attitude of the round might change. I hate to use the term tumbling, but many times bullets will, in fact, their pitch will change. And so you will get perhaps what we refer to as a keyhole injury into the head. So the tip, if you'll just imagine the tip of the bullet slightly rising off of the horizontal plane. So it's kind of pitching up vertical. As that round passes through that potato, it can strike the skull. And the reason we call it a keyhole is if you think about an old skeleton key and where you stick the key into that lock, the traditional lock that's kind of shaped like a skeleton itself, with a little head at the top, little bulb, and then it kind of blouses out down. The entrance wound will look like that as opposed to a perfect circle. And so you're looking at this and you're scratching your head and saying, what? Did it pass through something? I don't see broken glass, wasn't fired through a door. Well, then you go back to the scene and you begin to understand that, well, you've got this potentially a potato that's blown apart at the scene. It's left behind unless he took time to collect it all and leave. And also you've got, if it's a 380 you're talking about an ejected shell casing. Well, he's taken time to sneak up on her because he had access to the apartment with a key that was furnished to him. Would he have spent enough time in that environment after he shot her to collect everything up that was around her? I cannot imagine under any circumstances you could get every bit of the residue that's created by this potato being literally pulpified, because that's what's going to happen. If this thing is passed through by this round, it doesn't matter that 380 is not a real robust round, because it's not just the bullet that's creating the destruction of the potato and the head. It's also the gas, that explosive event that occurs. And so I cannot imagine, unless he had it taped up really, really tightly, that you wouldn't have something left behind. And I would imagine that was going to be a key to all of this.
It's unbelievable that we're at this point where police investigators were able to put this all together fairly quickly. The boyfriend at the scene calling 911 about his 7 months pregnant girlfriend being shot in the head. They're able to trace his best friend from Oklahoma has been at his house for a couple of days. They've got all their proof. And yet, I say all their proof, they have the outline of what has taken place. But you mentioned something earlier. You've got a federal crime and a state crime. You mentioned that that federal crimes are just different and as to how they charge. Is that making too light of it, or is that why it took so long?
Yeah, I think that's probably why it took so long. Look, you've got two guys, Dave, that are, first off, they're facilitating a conspiracy. Okay,
right. It is a murder for hire.
It is a murder for hire.
And are there two dead people because of the baby being 7 months?
Yeah, and that baby at 7 months is viable.
Right.
It's viable. You can't get past that. The baby is viable. So
how long is that baby? After she's shot in the head, how long could that baby still be viable? Could there have been? Okay.
Not long. Not long. If I would assume if somebody had heard it, hopped on 911 and gotten, paramedics there very quickly. And I don't know how noticeable her pregnancy, because, if you're dealing with let me play this out in my mind. If you're dealing with a gunshot wound and you show up at the scene, you're not examining an abdomen. You're not looking at this woman as like, gee, I wonder if her pregnancy is viable. You don't even know she's pregnant.
Right.
All you know is that you've got blood pouring from a defect, which might be an irregular defect in her skull. You might have two. And your idea is to save her life. Theoretically, if they had a team standing by, I guess there could have been a chance that that baby may have survived.
Okay.
But it's a moot point, because he shot her in her bed there in that house. And when he pulled that trigger, he took two lives at this point in time. And back to the federal issue here, and again, not an attorney, but when you're talking about the principal here, this man, if you want to call him a man, that would facilitate the execution of this poor pregnant woman. Dave, he got on a train and fled the state. He crossed state lines at that point in time after initiating all of this and getting this thing. You've also got them communicating, okay, as well. This guy's in Oklahoma when he's setting this whole thing up. I am going to pay you with money that I have taken from a public fund, because that is a public school, and I'm going to hand this over to you. It's going to facilitate you coming across state lines into the state in order to perpetrate this crime. Then you're going to leave the state. The feds' fingerprints would be all over this. And here's the thing about the feds. When you enter into that system and you're convicted, they have mandatory sentencing, Dave. You're not going to walk out the door. You're not. In states, things like that can kind of be negotiated a little bit, and you might get some time off for good behavior. If a federal judge looks at you and they sentence you, baby, let me tell you something. You're going in for all day long. And I think that's probably what they're looking at, Dave.
I know the one thing about this, that it did take a number of years, Joe, that when everything was said and done, Cornelius Green did plead guilty. He took a plea deal, and the only way there would be agreements on this between the state and the federal charges was that he was going to plead guilty to get the death penalty off the table. That was his Cornelius Green. That was his motivation for doing a deal. The motivation for the state taking the deal was that he would be sentenced to prison for the rest of his life without parole. And that was the negotiation that took place. But and again, neither of us are attorneys, although we do hang out with a lot of them, it seems. In this particular case, Phillip Cutler has pleaded not guilty to the crime. And Green, as part of his negotiation, he does not have to testify against Phillip Cutler.
Which in and of itself is amazing to me, that he could not be compelled to do that. But suffice it to say, there will be a day in court for Cutler, and it's coming. And I think that it's really important that we remember that we were robbed of these two lives that night in that bed, but also these children and that staff that occupied that school were robbed of this woman's presence as well. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.